In October of 2024, in a packed church in Toledo, Ohio, a legend collapsed. A man who had sung his way into the hearts of millions. A pastor who had buried princes and prayed with presidents. A gospel giant, crumpling to the floor mid-service. The internet exploded. The headline screamed, "Goodbye!" Social media ran his eulogy before he even woke up. But here's what they didn't tell you. He got back up. This is the real story of Pastor Marvin Winans. To understand Marvin Winans, you have to understand where he came from. Detroit, Michigan, a city forged in steel, soul, and struggle. And inside one particular household on the east side of that city, a household where gospel music wasn't just played on Sunday mornings, it was the language the family spoke every single day. A dynasty was being born. David and Dolores Winans raised 10 children. 10, and they raised every one of them in the church, in the Word and in harmony, literally. Born on March 5th, 1958, Marvin Winans was the fourth of those 10 children. Alongside his brothers Bebe, Cece, Ronald, Carvin, and Michael, the name Winans would go on to become synonymous with gospel music excellence for the next 5 decades. But it didn't start with arena tours and Grammy Awards. It started in small churches, Sunday school rooms, youth choirs where nobody was paying attention yet. Marvin and his brothers, Ronald, Carvin, and Michael, began performing together as the Winans in the late 1970s. And what they brought was something the gospel world hadn't quite heard before, a sound that was rooted in tradition, but soaked in soul, R&B, and raw emotion. They weren't just singing about God, they were feeling it. By the early 1980s, the Winans had signed with Light Records and later with QS Records, yes, Quincy Jones's label, and the floodgates opened. Their 1985 album, Tomorrow, broke gospel music wide open. It crossed over. It got radio play. It got secular radio play, which back then was either considered a miracle or a controversy, depending on who you asked. Songs like Restore, Tomorrow, and It's Time became anthems. They weren't just Sunday morning music. They were Wednesday night, 2 a.m. I'm not sure I'm going to make it music. The Winans earned multiple Grammy Awards and Dove Awards. They were nominated so many times, a nomination almost became expected. Their sound influenced an entire generation of gospel artists, from Kirk Franklin to Ty Tribbett to Maverick City Music. You can draw a straight line. Marvin, his voice was the anchor. Deep, rich, authoritative. When Marvin sang a lead vocal, you felt the weight of every word. But the music was only part of who he was becoming. In 1989, Marvin Winans made a decision that would define the second half of his life. He planted a church, Perfecting Church, in Detroit, Michigan. And for a man who could have ridden the gospel touring circuit indefinitely, selling out venues, collecting royalties, living off legacy, he chose instead to stay, to be a shepherd, to be present. It started as a small congregation, grew, over the decades, into a powerhouse ministry with thousands of members. Marvin became known not just as a performer, but as a pastor, a counselor, a community anchor, a spiritual father. He officiated the funerals of icons. When Whitney Houston passed away in February 2012, it was Marvin Winans who delivered the eulogy at her funeral, a ceremony watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world. He stood in that pulpit at New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey, and he delivered. He wept. He preached. He brought the room to its knees. That moment reminded the world. Marvin Winans wasn't just a singer from the 80s. He was a man of God in every sense of the phrase. Behind the pulpit, behind the legacy, behind the perfectly pressed suits and the powerful sermons, Marvin Winans was fighting. In July of 2024, at 66 years old, he made a stunning announcement to his congregation. He had been diagnosed with bladder cancer. Let that land for a moment. Here is a man who had spent his entire adult life ministering to others in their sickness, their grief, their confusion, and now it was his turn to face that valley. Marvin Winans did what Marvin Winans does. He declared his healing. He leaned into his faith. He kept preaching. He kept showing up. And then he testified. After treatment and tests, he stood before his congregation and announced the doctors had looked and looked again and found nothing. There's nothing there, he said. The cancer was gone. And then, in October of 2024, came the collapse. He was in Toledo, Ohio, guest speaking at a church service. Midway through the event, he lost consciousness and fell to the floor. The room panicked. Cell phones came out. Clips spread across the internet within minutes. On social media, true to form, immediately began writing his obituary. But Marvin Winans lived. He recovered, and he addressed his church directly. The cause was dehydration and overwork. He had been pushing too hard, not taking care of his body, and his body finally said, "Enough." He is now 68 years old as of March 2026. He is not retired. He is not dying. He is still standing. But 2025 didn't offer him peace either. In October of 2025, a video went viral, and not in the way any pastor wants to go viral. During a fundraising service at Perfecting Church, Marvin Winans publicly called out a church member who had donated approximately $2,000 to a fundraising campaign when the requested giving amount was $2,000. The clip spread fast, and critics called it embarrassing, humiliating. Some said it was a form of spiritual manipulation, using shame from the pulpit to pressure congregants into larger donations. The backlash was swift and loud. Think pieces were written, YouTube videos were made, the comment sections were brutal. Marvin Winans responded by saying the video was taken out of context, that what the camera captured was not the full picture of the moment. And here is where we must pause, because this incident, like so many viral moments, forces us to ask a harder question. What happens when a man who has spent a lifetime building something great stumbles publicly? Does one uncomfortable moment erase decades of service? Does a viral clip define a legacy? That is a question each viewer has to answer for themselves. But it would be dishonest to tell the story of Marvin Winans in 2025 and 2026 without telling that chapter too. Great men are still human men, despite the health battles, despite the controversy, despite the clickbait and the speculation. Marvin Winans is still building. Perfecting Church has long had plans for a new permanent sanctuary on Woodward Avenue in Detroit, one of the most iconic streets in a city that has itself been fighting for its comeback for decades. The project has faced delays, financial challenges, the kind of obstacles that would make most people walk away. But as of 2026, those plans are still moving forward. There's something almost poetic about that. A man who collapsed but didn't die. A man who had cancer but was healed. A man who was shamed online but kept preaching. Still building a house, still finishing what he started. Detroit and Marvin Winans have more in common than people realize. Here is what the headlines miss. They tell you about the collapse, but not about the comeback. They tell you about the controversy, but not about the cancer survivor. They tell you about the farewell, but the man hasn't said goodbye. Marvin Winans is 68 years old, and he is still in that pulpit. He has watched his family become one of the most celebrated musical dynasties in American history. He has sung at the funerals of legends. He has pastored one of Detroit's most enduring congregations for over 35 years. He has battled cancer and won. He has fallen to the floor and gotten back up, and still he shows up. Maybe that's the sermon right there, not the one he preaches from the text, the one he preaches with his life. The real question isn't whether Marvin Winans is saying goodbye. The real question is, are you paying attention while he's still here? If this story moved you, share it, because real legacy deserves to be told right.